Hello and welcome to the Aegex webinar. Today we are talking about using mobile technologies to improve lone worker productivity and safety. Our speaker today is Craig Gleason, who is Director of Partners at Aware360. And he'll be talking about the idea that technologies can help lone workers comply with regulations that require them to check in on a constant basis, technologies that can also reduce their distractions, save them time, and reduce incident response time with this active monitoring system that's supported by a web-based control center in 24-hour incident response. So what we'd like to do is hear from Craig, and he can do his presentation, and then during that time, the audience can feel free to ask questions. If you look to your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see a question box where you can type in your question for Craig here, and then at the end of the presentation we will take a few minutes to address those questions. If we don't get to your question here, we will respond to you via email privately. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Craig Gleason.
Thanks, Lee. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. Thanks for joining us today. As Lee mentioned, we will have opportunity for questions at the end or in the future. If you'd like to get in touch with us later, please reach out to Aegex and they'll connect you with us. So just to kind of start it off for everyone, a little bit about who we are as an organization. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Aegex today. If you're not familiar with Aware360, we've been in the safety business for a number of years, more than 20 to date. So we've got customers across multiple sectors who use the technology. And in fact, we monitor more than 30,000 people on a daily basis. And we can correlate all this down to actually 8 key scenarios in 2018 where people's lives were actually saved as a result of the technology. And 1.3 million hours of monitoring every week. So that's a collection of everybody who's connected to the platform at all times. So, you know, where we are today is a way for organizations to check in and allow remote lone workers to check in. But as we go forward, the vision of our technology is to be able to provide predictive capability versus reactive. So currently it's, you know, call, get help. We're aggressively building out the platform that you're going to learn a little bit about today to allow people to try and help get predictive around when things may occur in their business. So just to kind of kick it off, and you may identify with some of these challenges in your own organizations, but you know, as the world's moved forward, we've come across a number of things when it comes to keeping people safe, right? So, you know, organizationally, we tend to grow as years go by. So we have multiple locations, which, you know, not just in our home state or home country, but even across the globe. You might have multiple work sites, and work sites can be areas that are connected to a network. You may have areas that are disconnected. So how do you deal with the challenge of people in where they don't have connectivity, close quarters, underground, in basements, those sorts of things? How do I deploy a solution that can help me keep those people safe? We've got a wide array of different technologies that we have to think about out there. There's different networks, there's different OSs, there's all kinds of devices. With that expanse, how do we deal with that? How do we need to manage all of those devices? And again, you know, just for interest's sake, if you've attended Mobile World Congress, I think I saw 300 or 400 different devices, and I'm not talking phones and computers, and I'm talking about hard hats, jackets, tags, all kinds of things that we have to deal with as organizations. You know, more and more third-party contractors. We deal with third-party contractors for all kinds of reasons. Some of the legislation that's coming out today is enforcing that organizations extend their compliance to third-party contractors. So we have to consider their capabilities. How do we bring them into our fold when our rules and the government regulations come into play? Data collection. So data collection, it's always been a complex problem, and I think as we're dealing with people and moving around in various locations, that's something that's still difficult to do. So how do we collect that data? How do we report on it? How do we make sure we can leverage it to ensure we're completing our compliance for anything we need to submit to the government? I think we live in a world of change. I think we would all agree to that. The circumstances come up that we didn't account for. Specifications change, and then people change. How do we bring people on? How do we bring new people on, or new roles, or new individuals into the environment where we need to keep them safe? And I think those requirements, we think those requirements continue to grow. So lone worker, the idea of lone worker in the energy sector isn't new, but how can we leverage technology to make it better? But we know with all the things going on, like cannabis legislation across the country, how do we deal with cognitive impairment? How do we deal with those challenges in the workplace? And then scale, right? We acquire new organizations, we add new people. How do we bring them into the fold? Is the system that we have in place ready to do that? How do we make it easy, and how do we add them into the mix? So these are just some of the things that, if you're in that safety role in an organization, that you might be thinking about on a daily basis. So we're going to talk about some of these things today, some in more detail than others. One of the goals that this should be on our minds is of course that priority of keeping people safe. How do we protect our workers, because an injured worker causes a number of issues in our organization. So there's of course the individual themselves and their care and what happens to them, and then what happens if we're now time out of the workplace and need to bring people in to fill gaps, and so on and so forth. All these things are critical for us to take care of. But what we roll into in that is how do we leverage this information to be more productive, right? What's the cost of productivity when we're not doing the best job we can at keeping people safe? So, we've got that sort of big term in there, people IoT. So Internet of Things is really just the idea of connecting things to the internet for real-time information. And what we're talking about is how do we connect ourselves better with our people? What devices can we use, and how do we connect with them to get them information and get information to them and from them? And that's really what allows us to start tying into the concept around real-time productivity, right? Can we leverage this data to be smarter about our projects? Can we get out in front of problems more quickly? Can we get access to that data faster? And those are all the things that are going to help us drive better decisions in business in the future. So, I think today one of the biggest challenges that we have is we're typically reactive in this universe. So, if you have the practice today in your particular workplace, you might be using something that you've had for quite a long time. So it's essentially, a regular check-in schedule by employees. They would call into a call center or a monitoring center, give their name and location, and that gets written down that they're safe. In this type of environment, you're completely, reactive. You're not there until something happens. So it's pretty binary, right? 0 and 1. There's a problem, you get another call. Outside of the 2-hour window, you really don't have any idea how people are doing in particular tasks, or even as something as simple as where they are, right? So in that practice of calling in to ensure as a check-in procedure, 10 minutes after that conversation, they've moved. So if something was to happen, how do you know where they are? And that's kind of that reactive universe. It's a pretty common practice today, and it's the best solution that we've had before. But what we're looking to do is move into that area of being where you can now be proactive. So there are different types of emergencies. It's not binary. It can be anything from I'm about to do something risky to I just need simple assistance, right through to SOS, right? So I need help immediately. And technology is allowing us to be more aware of those different states that you can be in as an employee, and how you would manage them differently as an organization. And again, not to continue to harp on the concept, but once we can be proactive, the next step is to be predictive. So the safety suite that we're talking about allows you to look at different elements of how you keep employees safe, and then how you can take all that information and look at it from a holistic view and decide how you can be more predictive, with everything from driving routes to if somebody's at greater risk for one reason or another. Are certain tasks more risky than others? Do we have to handle those differently? And all those things tie into that predictive concept. So just to give you an idea of how this all works together. So we're all familiar with the tablet that Aegex has. It's a terrific product that, if you're in industrial situations, it goes places that other devices can't, and you can kind of count on it to work all the time. So the way we work with Aegex today is that it offers what we refer to as the control center view. So while we have apps that can reside on various devices, the Aegex tablet can give you a window into where your employees are. You can communicate with them through real-time messaging. You can see the alerts real-time that employees may be submitting. So all those things feed into that interface. So if you've got remote managers responsible for the safety of their team and employees, whether they've checked in or checked out, again, drawing geofences around particular areas if there's areas at risk, they can all do that right through the tablet. So, imagine the challenge of being a manager in the field, and you've got 250 people that you need to know their whereabouts at any given time, and whether or not they're safe in the tasks that they're doing. This solution allows you to do that. So you kind of avoid all that constant risk, of a cell phone not working, connecting back and forth, missing a phone call, somebody leaves their phone in their truck or their work vehicle or on a piece of equipment. That's going to make it really difficult if that's your only means to rely on how you can connect to employees. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the Aware 360 safety suite. So we today have 4 products in place that can be used independently depending on your requirements. The center of that hub is really SafetyAware. So SafetyAware is the technology that helps support lone workers, so you can get away from that manual universe of calling in every couple of hours. This is a way for people to interact where just on as frequent basis as they need, not just that 2 hours. But the idea is that the platform itself supports all 4 of these of the applications and brings it all into one fold, so you can provide a safety suite to your workers. Now the solutions can be deployed. They don't have to be all deployed to every customer, or to every user. So iDriveAware is our driver behavior technology. That, of course, would go to anybody who's on the road. Aware for Duty is a cognitive impairment tool that will allow you to, for users to gauge whether or not they can perform optimal on that day. That could go to various groups of employees. So though they all can be leveraged to go across your entire workforce, you can specify which application by role or function within your organization. There's a little more detail here, so I'm just going to jump to this slide. So today we talked about SafetyAware mostly, which is our lone worker technology. That can be used on a number of devices, of course, with Aegex being that overarching control center that you can look into. It's satellite friendly. We also offer different wearables that can be used to connect to the applications themselves, Bluetooth for discrete, SOS calls, those sorts of things. But it is real time. We do work with a real-time response center, and I'll get into that flow in a little bit. The second technology or second application that we have, of course, is driver behavior. So, today, a lot of us have heavily invested in telematics equipment in our vehicles, which is terrific. iDrive can be used in conjunction with those technologies and leverage the data. But the difference with iDrive is it really is about the driver. So technologies used that tell how fast the driver's driving, heavy braking, any number of driving metric that you want to record, but most importantly, hands-on device. So if it's picked up and used while the vehicle's in motion, that gets recorded. Where we see this adding a lot of value to organizations is when you start talking about gray fleet or contractors who, of course, you wouldn't go to the expense of putting pricey telematics equipment in those vehicles. iDrive is something that you can use to deploy quickly and be able to now use that data coming from personal vehicles or third-party contractors into your mix and get understanding of routes and accidents and things of that nature. So it's just deployed that easily. There is, of course, dashboards all in behind these solutions, so you can dig in and look at that data in different ways. So those are the first two in place today. The third, which is fairly new for us and launching very shortly, is what we call Aware for Duty. So it's really important that we be able to measure worker fatigue in the workplace. So is an individual at an optimum level where they can perform their job and keep everybody, including themselves, safe in that environment. So there's lots of things that contribute to fatigue, right? I mean, we immediately kind of go to drugs and alcohol, and yes, those two things are part of it, but illness, stress, sick child or parent, all of these things contribute to fatigue. I think the statistic is under 5 hours of sleep in a night, you're 3 times more likely to be in an accident at work. So what we're doing here is giving you the opportunity to get out in front of those scenarios. So how do we ensure that employees are at their best? A good note here is there are other technologies doing this sort of thing, but they do a communal baseline where we actually baseline individuals on the interaction with the application itself. So why that's important is an individual is only competing against themselves. And I use the word competing lightly. Really, it's not about a pass or fail. It's about maintaining your score each and every time. So the app actually looks for variance, but up, above, or below your typical score, and that score is then recorded and shared with management if it continues to be in a negative throughout the day or however often you're taking the test. And then of course, journey management. So today, journey management tends to be very paper driven for the pre-trip risk assessments. We kind of taken that out and combined it all into the application itself. So now you can, take all your journey management best practices. It's all combined in an app. No paper to manage. You can have various communication throughout the journey, various check-ins with response centers or management if you need to. But this level of integration is now just something that we're really talking about, that full sort of circle of protection when it comes to keeping workers safe. Okay. So how does this all work? It's really more complicated than of course the slide here would represent. But really we're taking people through all kinds of those different connection points that we talked about, pushing that data real time into a control center that is used on the Aegex tablet. The third piece that I do want to mention is there is an organization that sits on the periphery. One of the things that's key to our solution that's really a differentiator is that we still work with real-time response centers for certain situations, primarily SOS. If you have a person in peril, there is no best option to connect with first responders than going through having people do that. So what we've done is design the solution to be completely used through technology when it can be, but when it comes to serious situations, real people do get involved for SOS and emergency centers. So we as an organization have taken on the work to build those relationships with real-time response centers so you don't have to. We do work with real-time response centers that you may partner with today. So if you do have one, we can help build the capability into those organizations. And some of you may even have your own real-time response centers that some of our customers do. So just to kind of reiterate, using real-time response centers gives you, there's a certification, typically an ISO certification. It gives individuals in the field somebody to connect with in key situations. There is a level of accountability that comes to having that. And then, of course, having response center relationships all over the world is something organizationally you don't have to worry about, because we've gone to the lengths of establishing those networks if you have to put remote employees in various geographies or locations. So just to talk about a couple of quick use cases specifically that I may have alluded to throughout the presentation. So we talk about lone workers. So these are folks who are out in the field. So we've got customers today where more than 10% are considered lone workers. And they've deployed the technology across their organization for 24/7 monitoring, because they operate in multiple shifts and of course operate in geographies of various connectivity and do so in multiple countries. So there's a great need and a great risk to those employees on a regular basis. So one of the big outcomes and the challenges of the manual loan check-in process today is the cost of doing that. It's a per call cost that I'm sure you're aware of. There's been an average reduction of 30% in that calls, which of course represents thousands of dollars in billing from those call centers. So it's also helped them reach a level of compliance within the country and in the government that they publish quite frequently. So the second customer to talk about, and they may seem the same as remote and lone worker, there of course is crossover to those two use cases, but there are people who work remote every single day. And that can be anybody from maintenance crews to people working on various pipelines to people in the field who never check into the office. So you aren't necessarily either one of these all the time, but remote means you're far from home on a far more regular basis. So this particular customer works on servicing roads they're part of the public sector. And of course, that comes with all kinds of hazards, remote environments. They've deployed the technology again for 24/7 coverage, and they've actually experienced a reduced employee call time by 25%. And they actually, this customer frequently engages with their employees who have an increased level of job satisfaction by knowing that the organization is keeping them safe. So I think that's we got one more. So we have a specific customer called Crescent Energy who's based in Calgary, Alberta, which is where our headquarters is. They operate on both sides of the border. They've got field workers, I think, in Utah as well as Calgary, and we monitor workers at both sides of the border. So there's 600 employees that are currently being looked at 24/7, 365 days a year. So they had a huge problem where employees just weren't calling in to do their check-ins, which of course causes compliance risk, and that has essentially been eliminated at the organization. So great success stories. So that's the end of the slide. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. If you don't have questions today, but think of them later, please reach out. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Craig. I think we don't have any questions at this moment, but like Craig said, we're available for any questions that you may think of afterwards. Please do write to us at contact@aegex.com or go on to aegex.com on our contact page of our website, and we'll right away get back to you with those answers via Craig. So without further questions, I guess we are ending this webinar, and you'll be able to download also a handout of Craig's slides here in the GoToWebinar control panel under handouts. There's a section called handouts. There is a PDF there for your use. So please do be in touch, and we thank you very much for your attendance. Goodbye.
Thanks.